Hello and welcome. It's Shelley Carpati. I'm writer and meditation guide and host of the Spicy Soul Mama podcast. On this show, we delve into what it's like to be a parent today and how we can connect this to our spiritual lives for authentic living. These are compassionate conversations for insight to our universal truths and what is required to heal ourselves and the world around us, hopefully, our children too. These are conversations with parents who have children that are challenging and perhaps live outside of the normal societal boundaries. It is my hope that these conversations will bring meaning to the world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming and will spark some curiosity, empathy, and tiny seeds of awareness so that we might all collectively learn, grow, and remember our humanity and interconnectedness. And don't forget to find me on Substack to subscribe for updates at Spicy Soul Mama. So, welcome to the podcast. I am happy to bring to you my new and dear friend Karen Wesley, who is a writer and a mom who also has a lot of overlap in what we write about. And she's a blogger. She lives in Texas, but California is her home. She's been raising she's raised three young men, two of whom are autistic, and she's been very involved in nonprofit and leading support groups and things that just contribute to, raising awareness and getting people to connect with her. So she also has a Substack, Karen Wesley Writes. So definitely go on there and subscribe to her as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Karen.
I'm so glad to be with you. As always, we always have great conversations. So I'm happy
Yes.
to be here.
Thank you. Yes. And so we met because of this writing community called a writing room. And we met online and we just I can't remember when we first started interacting on that platform. Do you happen to recall? Not to quiz you, like give you a
Yeah,
quiz, but I just
actually, yeah,
remember.
I do because I remember we were in probably a silent writing group and sharing a little bit after. And when you mentioned writing about your son and having some mental health issues, um, I was like, oh, you know, that's somebody I need to get to know because we have a lot in common. So, I mean, you're a writer and dealing with a pretty, it's just a different dynamic to life when you're dealing with a child who you love, who has needs that are challenging. So I knew that we needed to get to know each other.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I mean, it was really magical to be able to be in a space in the writing room where we could be, very open and vulnerable and supported in our writing. And it continues to be a really great space, I think, for us and many other writers. They just provide so much support and encouragement for us to keep going. And did you start your Substack like at the same time as a writing room, or did you have it before?
No, let's see. So I started my Substack last July. So it was probably just a little bit, I think it was a little bit after the conference that they had, maybe it was pretty close in connection with going to the big oh
Retreat,
the
the big,
retreat that they had. I did
yeah.
the retreat online and I knew that I wanted to kind of take my writing in a more significant direction. I wanted to start thinking about it more seriously. I want to get this memoir written and finished. And um, I knew that I wanted to kind of connect to a little bit of a different audience than I was with just the parenting blog.
Mm.
So I came over to Substack and I started first with Medium and I didn't have a lot of connection there. But I found more between the writing room and Substack. I found a really great writing support community.
Yeah, same here. I was also on Medium for a while, and it just didn't have that personal connection. And it was a great place to try out some fun different writing, but I really have feel like I found my voice since I joined a writing room and moved over to Substack myself. So it's I highly recommend anybody who's a writer out there to go check out those two resources if you haven't already, a writingroom.com, and then Substack is where you can find some really tremendous writing and just a very warm and welcoming community to because everyone has a story to share, and everyone's, even though our stories may be universal, we all have this we have a unique story within a universal truth. And um, yeah, so that's kind of what I really enjoy about those two communities too, is finding that.
Both of those communities are incredibly supportive. Um, I have, I haven't had very many negative interactions at all. I had none in the writing room. And everyone just seems like they're looking for connection and understanding. And, the work that we're doing is very vulnerable. Um, and everyone's just pretty open with each other. You don't
Hmm.
find that very many places. So
It's
I'm glad
true.
to have found that.
Especially with today, like there's just so much isolation, and being vulnerable is what connects us and keeps us connected as, human. We can certainly be, keyboard warriors as much as we want in other social spaces, but it really doesn't add to the richness of life, frankly. So
It can
I've
actually make you feel even more lonely when
mhm,
you're kind of just shouting out into the void. And then you also run across, when you're in a social space like Instagram or Facebook, you also are going to run across a lot of some negativity that goes along with whatever the positive that you're getting out of it. So yeah, I like kind of
exactly.
bringing it down to a safer audience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree. I'm so glad we're on this writing journey together. And now we can talk about what it's like to be a parent. We both have young men. Yours are a little bit older. My son is 22. And how old? So tell me a bit about well, you have three sons, and one your bonus son who's atypical, and the other two are young adults. Maybe we could just first talk about, like, I'd really like to understand, and maybe for our listeners, like, what does it mean to be on the spectrum? And what are the right phrases to say? Like, do we call, like, for labeling, is it okay to say my son is autistic, or do we say my son is on the spectrum? Like, what is the best way to approach that? And please tell me a little bit more about what it means to be on the spectrum and autistic.
Well, I think it depends on who you're talking to. There's a lot of opinion on which is more correct. Most recently, I've been hearing that people that are actually on the spectrum like to be called autistic, and not, has autism, but and I always kind of at first looked at it like it was semantics, but and different people have different, very strong beliefs about it. But my sons they're both kind of open
Mhm,
to it, since my 25-year-old is now kind of in the mental health field. He's more in tune with, how it's a part of him. It's not all of him. And so but I do say I have sons that are autistic, but
mhm.
sometimes I slip and say, have autism. I mean,
Right.
they know I love them. So
Yeah,
that's all that
yeah.
matters.
So it's
Um,
kind of like saying, like, they live with the autism characteristics, so to speak.
yeah,
Yeah. So
right,
instead of
right,
saying it's like they're autistic. Got it.
right,
That's the same with my son and living with schizophrenia. I say he lives with schizophrenia. Yeah.
right.
It's not all of who he is.
So yeah, so I think it's different for each person what it means to be autistic. Um, right down to the two boys that I have, who I raised, all here in the same home with my husband, um, they're just very different,
Hmm.
which is why, like, so Kendall is, my firstborn is going to be 29 in a few days.
Oh, wow.
And he was the first to be diagnosed. But I mean,
And
this
how
was
old
back
was
in,
he? Yeah, how old
he
was
is
he?
20, he will be
No,
29.
was. No, how old was
He,
he?
at the time he was born in 1999, and at first the diagnosis was pre preschool, like he was in preschool for children with disabilities. And at that time, it was just a speech delay. His speech was, he spoke a lot, but very, very convoluted, and we couldn't understand a lot of it.
Hmm.
So at first it was that, and then by the time he was in kindergarten, first grade, we knew that there were some issues with focus. You could see it a little bit more clearly when he got into a kindergarten classroom, and they're all sitting together in, circle time, and he would be, looking off everywhere instead of like really connecting with the group.
Mm.
So we knew something different was going on there. And then by first, second grade, we I could see that like he's really, really intelligent and could do math and science and read and all of that, but um there were just some gaps in focus. And
Hmm.
I felt like first grade was building blocks of learning math and reading, and I didn't want him to miss out on those building blocks. So we had further evaluation, then they came up with ADHD.
Mm.
And but even that didn't seem totally correct. Um, like there was something else going on. There was another boy who he was in class with who did have Asperger's, but
Mm.
they were very different.
Hmm.
Um, because I mean, this kid was, he was highly interested in anime and Japanese, and he could speak all these, different languages and things, but yet he refused to do his times tables, even though we knew he definitely had the capability of it.
Yeah,
So it's just different in each person.
right.
But so
And
actually the process was kind of convoluted, and it took until about fifth or sixth grade before we
wow.
actually got the autism official diagnosis.
Do you think that, yeah, and so that's a really long journey, and there must have been a lot of turmoil and, heartache, and I'd imagine tears and worry during all that
Ye-
process.
Yeah, yeah, there was. And there's, the motherly, like, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
All the guilt and just trying to get it all figured out. But I was, one of the things that I felt really blessed to be able to be uh, at home and be present and be
Mm.
at the school, and
Mm.
just kind of, talking with teachers and volunteering so that I had
Yeah,
reasons to be in the hallways and see what was going on.
right.
And I think that helped, being able to be present and actually paying attention what was going on. So you'll have to realize, like, this is 1999 that he was born, and the early 2000s, when diagnoses weren't being handed out the way that
Right.
they are right now. So it took a longer period of time.
Well, were
So,
they very quick to go to ADHD? They were like, oh, that's what everybody has. We just put that label on
right,
everybody. Yeah.
right. And I didn't really kind of go for it at first, which is
Mm.
why I took him. That was a diagnosis that they came up with at school, but I took him and had my own to see a neuropsychologist and had his testing done there
That's
to,
good.
yeah. And it was hours of testing
Yeah.
over a period of time.
Yeah.
And he was able to really break it down and show me where his strengths and weaknesses were. And it was, the frontal lobe issues. And um, but he still, even then, didn't right away, didn't come up with autism. It was kind
Wow.
of like, I guess because there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and
Yes.
some of the symptoms of autism. So it wasn't until sixth grade when the social relationships became much more important,
Mm-hmm.
and he started to feel a big difference between him and the peers that he had
Mm,
been with since like kindergarten.
right. So how does this relate in the timeline to, because you have is your other son younger?
Yes, he's younger. And since Kendall was speech delayed, we kind of had an eye on Cole, but he
What's
was a
the
little
age
bit,
difference?
the
Like when
age
did
difference is about 3.5 years.
Okay. Wow. So I just want to put this in perspective. So here you have, Kendall, who's coming up in elementary school, and then Cole is born 3 years later, and you've got all like, you're like, oh my gosh, here's like another, my child. I can see that there's similar traits. And
The thing is that Cole is so different that we didn't see it as it
mm,
was,
wow. Okay.
because he's an intellectual and he was into um, academics and reading and weather and I mean all these different things. He's just
Mm-hmm.
much more um, he likes learning, and
Mm,
he was very cooperative and he didn't have the behaviors as that his brother did. So at first we didn't think it was the same, uh,
okay.
but he was still, had a speech delay, and so he was still kind of being monitored. And um, it was when he started to develop pretty heavy anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
and in school, it was as they layered his education where, like third, fourth grade, they start teaching you some things about science, and then they add on to it in the fourth and fifth grade. And he
Mm-hmm.
was so rigid in his
Mm.
thinking that he's like, he would tell the teacher, no, that's not what it is,
Wow. Yeah.
because that's not what they said last year.
Wow. That's
So it was
amazing.
that kind of thing where we started to see those kind of that rigidity and
Yeah.
the anxiety. And so this was like not too long after we had finally had Kendall's diagnosis that we thought, okay, there's some similarities, but there's
Yeah.
differences
So, so when you were getting all these testing done, were you living in California or in Texas at the time?
in Texas.
Okay.
Um,
So did you feel that you had to like fight for these tests? Because, in California where I live, I know that it's, my daughter is dyslexic, or she has dyslexia. She is not. And so in elementary school, we were able to get all these tests done through the school system. Did you get support through the public school system to have all these tests done? And did you have to
we
demand it or?
we did. I didn't necessarily trust all of the testing through the school system
Mm,
because my
mhm,
sons are Black, and we were in predominantly white schools, and
mhm,
the ADHD label was just really being thrown out there a lot.
mm,
I was like, are they just trying to kind of put them in a box? That was my thought
mhm.
process. But the school was actually, because I guess because I was present and involved in doing my own research, and they were pretty cooperative with
Good.
me.
Okay. Yeah. And so so at any point did you feel, like a loss, or did you go through some grief around, just it sounds very intense, like navigating, doing your own research, getting the school to do what they're supposed to do, taking care of these two young boys that are, just trying to navigate their own growth. I imagine that you went through a period of grief around all of that.
Yeah. Um, I think at one point, I was taking Kendall to therapy, and the therapist who was seeing him worked a lot with me, um, because he was only first, second grade at the time. He could see that I had some anxiety going on. I had
Mm,
some depression. I was, doing a lot of self-blaming. Um, and I was just, I don't know, there's a lot of depression because this was so consuming.
Yes.
And I didn't have a family support system here. My family was in California. My husband was traveling a lot. So
Yeah, wow. I can
it was a
imagine.
lot.
That's really intense. And here you are and you're a young mom, you don't have the wisdom that you have now, you know. Gosh, I often think about, gosh, it would be so amazing if I had the wisdom now when I was 30, to be a parent. It would have saved me so much heartache and pain. And
Right.
I really just honor like how amazing you are uh as a mom then and as a mom now. So I just really want to take a moment because, what you've told me, and I totally want to tell our listeners like how amazing your boys are now as young men, and they could not be this amazing without you. So, and of course, their dad, and
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
having that unit.
Right. Right. And that was important to have my husband involved with them because, they're boys. And I
Hmm.
wanted, I definitely wanted to keep that the presence of both parents. And we definitely be being here in Texas and both
Hmm.
of his families, East Coast, mine's West Coast. We needed each other as a resource. So yeah, it was good that they had both of us here. Although,
Yeah.
it was um, challenging for the marriage because there's so much of your focus that's on these kids. And with, especially with Kendall, there was a lot of behaviors that were very disruptive of the
Hmm.
family dynamics. So, um, we're,
Yeah.
good thing about it.
When you have a child that is taking away from, the focus of like the whole family unit, I really understand that, somebody will suffer, and it puts a lot of strain on a marriage, and it puts strain on the child that's not the focus. I'm sure at some points Cole felt, left out and annoyed and not understanding like why was Kendall getting all of the attention. And I
Right.
can imagine that dynamic was very challenging.
Right. And so we hadn't spoken about Adrian, who is my stepson, who
Yes.
is he was 7 years old when Kendall was born. So there's a
Okay.
big age gap between, all of them. And he felt like now he's a very independent kid and he was in sports and had all the friends and also very academic. But he did have those feelings of, man, this kid gets a lot of the attention.
Mm.
And he also kind of felt like, God, they're spoiling him.
Oh.
Because we had to give so much to
Hmm.
him. So
Hmm.
he had his feelings about
Mm.
the situation too. Of course,
Hmm.
he grew out of that as he got older and started to understand a little more. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Yeah, that's really challenging, and for all of you. And so what did you when was there any pivotal moment when when you leaned into your spirituality? Were you spiritual before you had kids? Did it get enhanced? Like, did you lean on it more? Like, what were the tools that you used for yourself in coming to terms with all of this and being able to come out the other side with some strength? And yeah, if there are any tools that you want to share.
well, I actually had a lot of kind of religious trauma from my childhood. So
Mm,
I wanted to expose my children to faith and Christianity, but I didn't get too deep into it, but I wanted to definitely expose them. We prayed here at home together, but I wasn't, we never were like faithfully going to a church. So um, I spent so much energy really kind of therapy and activities and different things to stimulate them that I didn't really do much for myself for a very long time.
mm,
And so and my medical doctor was the one who was initially, when I started taking anti-anxiety medication, she was the one who prescribed it, and I wasn't in therapy. at first. Um, so I was just kind of going along to get along and surviving.
Yeah.
And then um, one of the things that supported me most is that I started my own online support group. I,
Amazing.
I started the blog and subsequently a support group that went along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And we created this great little community online on Facebook, and we had a private group as well, where
Mm-hmm.
we could just kind of come together and scream and shout and be honest and real without any judgment.
Amazing.
And it was in that community that I met another mom who happened to live in the area,
Mm.
and she convinced me, you need to find a therapist.
Here,
And she would not let me, because I mean, she knew, I mean, she could see that I was going through a lot and that I needed more of an objective voice. And
yeah.
so she connected me with her therapist, and I've been with her ever since.
Amazing. I mean,
So
and
yeah,
that is like, I mean, you were just here you were, you're, giving and being the role, the sole, I mean, in a way, the sole caregiver, even though your husband was part of it, he was working, but you were the one that's researching and advocating and really, knowing the three boys like in and out of like what, their waves of emotions and their needs.
right.
And then you put on this caregiver group. I mean, and then you're giving more, even though you're feeling like supported because there are other people that are going through it at the same time, but still exuding more energy out instead of energy in. So that's really good that you found that
Yeah.
support.
But it was like it was um it was a social support when and I
Hmm.
was isolated,
Yeah.
and it was the same thing for them. So at first, when I first started it and it started to grow, because we ended up with almost 1,000 people in the small group. um I had other people who helped because
Hmm.
I couldn't always be available, and so I had other people who helped admin the group, and
Good.
we all developed some really close relationships, and so it was a little bit of work, but it was also
Hmm.
a support system.
Good. Good. Yeah, but I'd love to get back to a couple things. One is like the diagnosis. The one thing that I think is really important for listeners, something that I always like to make sure, like you described, you have two sons that live with autism, and they got a specific diagnosis, and they're, this the DSM, which stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, is autism in that DSM? Do you know? I was just
Hmm.
curious. I don't know if it's considered.
It's not because it's not that's a good question, whether or not it is. Because that autism is more of a neurological disorder
Okay.
as opposed to a mental health disorder.
Okay.
So it's trying, I can't remember whether or not, oh yes, it is definitely in the DSM because it
Hmm.
changed. Because Asperger's is like no longer a thing in the DSM. It's a autism spectrum disorder, and then there's different levels of it.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it is there. But
Okay. Oh, yeah.
along with autism usually comes a couple of cousins, like
Hmm.
anxiety and
Hmm.
depression, and in Kendall's case, oppositional defiant
Mm.
disorder. And then as they got into the teenage years, all of that got to be much more challenging because they're going through hormonal changes
Yes.
in the cesspool of middle school and high school and
Right.
all of those, feelings that we all go through.
Yes.
And it's just kind of magnified for them.
And how was it for them how was it for you all? You had mentioned that you were living in mostly a white community, and how was that for your boys growing up in that time period?
Uh, it, in a way, it did add an extra layer of being othered
Hmm.
because of, being um, Black, and also then the social aspects of autism got in the way. Um, and I always felt like, if you're kind of you know, Black and you're in the sea of white, and there's the schools were somewhat diverse, and they became more and more diverse as time
Mm.
went on.
Hmm.
So it got to be a little better, but that was definitely an extra layer
Mm.
to be concerned about. Oh, so what happened is, though, the boys did develop some friendships, and with Kendall, not as many deep, long-lasting relationships, but Cole, um, in elementary school, they started a social skills group that
Oh.
went on from third grade all the way through, and then they took that to middle school as well. So
Hmm.
he was in community with other boys who were also on the spectrum.
Oh, amazing.
And so he's one of the most social people I know that has autism. And he has, he's very empathetic. So
Hmm.
he developed some really good relationships that lasted.
Good.
He is one of them that he's been friends with since third grade. He's still friends with.
Amazing.
He's on the spectrum too. And then there were two other boys who were Black and who live in our neighborhood, and they developed a really close relationship.
Mm.
So it wasn't as much as an issue for him as it was for Kendall.
Hmm.
But the thing is that because we're in this area and we're isolated a little bit from family, I tried to make sure that they saw cousins and spent time every
Mm.
so that they would have that sense of family connection,
Nice. Hmm.
and also that they would have some access to their culture, because
Yeah.
we didn't get it quite as much here,
Yeah.
as they would have if we were living in Los Angeles or if we were living on the East Coast with my husband's family.
Right, right, definitely. So yeah, so instead of going to church, you were able to find community around, like making sure that they hung out with their cousins and everything.
Right,
That's
right. And we actually did go to church, and they went to, I bet it was really more for them than it was for
mm,
me.
mm-hmm,
Um, so they did vacation Bible school every summer.
mm-hmm,
And, we went to a church that had youth programs. Um, they didn't develop any really close connections through that, but we did go. Most their connections were mostly though through peers at school
yeah,
and
yeah.
family.
Well, you gave them that great base of like, hey, this is part of who you are and where you come from, and you can decide, how much you want to bring that into your lives.
Right. And it's so funny because come middle school, one of the friends that my son Kendall did develop a friendship with, uh, they did start going to church together with
Uh-huh.
the pastor who kind of uh, semi-adopted both of them.
Oh.
And it was a small church, little Church of Christ. And he really connected to his spirituality,
Mm,
um, that time of his life, and he's still very involved in it
that's amazing.
and connected to the church. Now, Cole also had that exposure,
Mhm.
um, but because he's much more, he questions everything.
Mhm.
um, he just didn't buy some of the stories
Nice.
that they were selling.
Yeah.
So I remember that he went to he went to vacation Bible school, and then he met a friend and went to like a youth service for a while with
Uh-huh.
her church, and he questioned them and told them how things didn't make sense and it didn't add up. And so he looked and he wanted to be involved, but he just had some questions. And so
Yeah.
he never really kind of developed the same kind of faith that his brother did.
Nice. That's really, yeah. I mean, it's great to question. I mean, that's a wonderful trait. And, some of the stories don't add up, right? You have to decide whether you want to believe in the mystical side of it all,
Right,
and or not. Like and take from it what works for you and leave the rest.
exactly.
So,
And I'm kind of the same way. So
mhm,
he and I kind of identify um, with that. And, my son, Kendall, who has a very, very strong faith. Um, it was almost like, because I told you that he's also a little bit oppositional. So it
mhm.
was almost like he really um, clung to his faith, and he almost, I mean, it was something that he tried to use to divide us because, oh, you guys aren't real Christians, and
Wow.
and that kind of thing. And I'm like, there's nuances, but he doesn't see a lot of the nuances. So
Yeah, it's very like concrete. He needs like the concrete, this is the way it is or not. It's like one way or not or the other
yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, he's the, going to church and Bible study and whatever he can do 2 or 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up with that and hated it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not into the structure.
Yeah.
I mean, I have more of a spiritual path. I do yoga
Mm-hmm.
and I meditate and I have conversations with God mostly through my writing. Um,
Mm.
and so I kind of connect in that way. And um, he's one of my sons is very rigid in his faith, and the other one is more open, like I am. So I was glad that I gave them the opportunity to make their own choices.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. I think it's really important to give our children like, this is part of who you are and where you come from. And, it's because it's always part of who we are, whether we can run from it as much as we want, but it always comes back at some point. We'll be if we ever have a dark night of the soul, well, who are we going to turn to? We always turn to God.
Right,
And whether you're an atheist or not, I mean, atheists, I'm sure, will be, like if they're in a dire situation, stuck under a car, who are they going to call? They're going to call for their mom? No, they're going to call for God. Like maybe they'll call for their mom, but you know, typically, mom isn't right there
right.
necessarily. So I mean, I know moms have superhuman strength when that adrenaline kicks in. We could lift a car, but but in any case, yeah. So how do you? That's really wonderful that you. So when you write, you say you talk to God. Do you feel that God ever like is talking through you? Do you get to a point where you're in such a meditative state where it's all the pen just is moving on its own?
Exactly.
Mm.
It's like the answers come straight through on the page.
Tell me about that
Um,
process. Like, how did you get to that point? Like, how did
well,
you?
I
Yeah.
think, well, as I said, like I have kind of like a spiritual, I follow a couple of different writers and spiritual teachers, and I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Elizabeth Gilbert who I was following, who talked about free writing
Hmm.
and just asking those questions that we need answers to on paper. And I started doing that. It was like a saving grace for me.
Hmm.
Um, because like, I mean, I have very close friends and I have people that I talk to when I'm going through something, but people are typically, they listen to a degree,
Hmm.
but no one, I mean, people have their own stuff going on. And
Right.
so, sometimes you have a conversation with someone and you hang up the phone and go, I don't even think they really heard me. So
Mhm.
I will write it down and have a conversation with God, and I get answers that way.
That is so cool. I love it. I think, yeah, it's for me, I feel like I have to have all kinds of ritual around it. I do
Mm,
all these like I light my candle and I do my meditation. I might listen to some music and then I just have to really relax. But
yeah,
it's you know,
I do the same, but and my favorite kind of meditation really is actually, when I go to yoga and when it's guided,
mhm.
and when, one of the things that I have fallen in love with is the sound meditation.
Oh
Oh,
yes.
because it's like, I think part of the problem, because I also have ADHD and
Mhm.
didn't find that out until recently, is
Mm,
that when I'm trying to meditate on my own, I kind of, like squirrel, I go
yeah,
into all these different thoughts.
yeah.
But when it's guided, I'm able to kind of focus a little bit better. Um,
Nice.
so, and I do, I like to do the candles, and, I have my room kind of it's definitely a peaceful space where I do my writing and connect in that
That's
way. But
very nice. It
yeah,
seems like a very nurturing thing, self-care, putting your oxygen mask on first and, you know.
yeah. And that's actually when you asked about spirituality, when I finally started going to therapy, it wasn't until Kendall was about 19, and he actually had to move out of the house. And he was in a home that lived not too far from where we live. And I had more time for myself where I could actually breathe and think. And
Mhm,
that's when I started therapy. And she kind of helped guide me towards the self-care things that I needed to do
mhm, mhm.
to it's like no wonder I was in such a depression because I wasn't really taking care of myself, and I
Right.
wasn't really I didn't have a deep spiritual practice. I
Yeah.
didn't wasn't doing yoga as much as I am
Yeah.
now. And so going to therapy, she kind of gave me, you know, permission to say no, and
Mhm.
kind of marching orders to take time for myself.
Good.
And so I think that's one of the things that kept me together.
I mean, and in that, like, so there I really connect the dots of, the gift of your son's challenges led you back to yourself to take care of yourself. And, who knows if that path would have been taken. We never know. Finding the gift in these special children that we have,
Mhm.
what do you think they've taught you the most?
Well, for one, they taught me how to look at people and accept them for who they are,
Mhm,
um, and to realize that most behaviors are a result of something, that's some
mhm,
kind of a communication, it's some
mhm,
kind of trauma, or it's a need that's not being met.
mhm,
Um, the other thing is that it taught me, having being their mother taught me a strength that I didn't know that I had, because
mm,
I'm like the least confrontational person on earth. At
mhm.
least I was, but when it came to them
Yeah.
and fighting for their needs,
Yes.
it made me realize that I can speak up for them and make sure that they get what they need. I can do the same thing for myself.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so wonderful. I think that is a really good lesson for all parents to learn from, especially moms. And I really thank you for sharing that with us.
I would
Is there
say
any?
that,
Yeah.
the self-care aspect of, that I finally got myself to to that point. I think there's a lot of moms that are in our position who just, I think as women, we're just kind of conditioned to do and give and comfort and um, do what we can to take care of our families. But it is really important to take care of yourself. as well. And sometimes when you're overwhelmed, you don't have time to think about that, but it
Right.
really is important.
It's so true. And I don't feel that, I mean, it was never a message that was given to me, growing up, like in terms of, being a young mom. And, I feel that it was always like, my husband was always able to put himself first, but for some reason I couldn't do that for myself.
Right.
And
Right.
so,
And I didn't say this part that at one point, my mother came to live with us. It was supposed to be for a short term, but it ended up being years that she
mm,
was here with us.
yeah,
In this room where I am right now, it's now my little space, was where she lived for several years in the middle of everything.
wow,
And I guess my point is with her, she didn't teach me any of those things either. She had that, the old fashioned mentality of, take care of your family, take care of your man,
yeah.
and even when she was here, and he was working and I was having a little bit of downtime, she would say things like, "What, aren't you gonna make your husband some lunch?" And I'm like, no, he
Ew.
knows where the kitchen is. I've been doing stuff for people all day. I'm not,
Yeah,
the people who are able to take care of themselves need to do, as much as they can for themselves.
exactly.
So yeah, I definitely wasn't taught that that's, and she still doesn't understand some of the self-care things that I do. Um,
Sure.
because she would prefer for me to be spending my time taking care of her. And um, it was actually my therapist who, because my mom was in a situation where she needed to move quickly. And I just said yes,
Hmm.
not thinking about, first of all, I didn't think she was going to stay here for long, but I just wasn't thinking about how overwhelmed I already was.
Yeah,
And actually, when she came was during their teen years where things kind of escalated and got
yeah.
harder. So, I was taking care of her and taking care of them, and it got to be a lot. And she didn't see that. I guess it's hard to imagine being as inundated as I was with
Yeah.
two with special needs. Um, and then she, of course, she had her needs.
Right, right.
So, yeah, definitely wasn't taught like, oh, go take care of yourself.
Yeah, go take a time out, girl, and go get a massage, get your nails done or something, like
Yeah,
anything.
right.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
is just, yeah,
yeah.
it's
I
really
learned.
hard.
I learned.
Yeah, I mean, we get to a point, right? We get pushed and pushed until, I mean, I know I did. I got pushed and pushed until I took it into my own hands and did what I had to do to put myself first for a little while.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say that volunteering a lot of information. One of the things I was taking a medication for anxiety and depression. And when it got to the point where I felt like it wasn't enough.
Hmm.
And even therapy wasn't enough. And I didn't want to, I was like, I don't want to take more medication. I want to,
Right.
so that's when I realized that I gotta do more to take care of myself. It has
Yeah.
to be more, um, I have to be more open and balanced in order to get better.
Well,
So,
you realize that there is a mind body connection, and America pushes drugs to fix it all and for band-aids and for, like that's why it actually kind of comes full circle to what we were talking about earlier is that, your children have very different needs. They might probably, and the DS, what I don't, I appreciate the DSM because we get a diagnosis and then we have it as a starting point. However, what I think is very important that I've seen is that doctors don't, if they just stay in that lane, they don't see that there's a spectrum of all of, like, depression. There's a huge spectrum. Autism, that they even call it a spectrum, and so it's not about, like, okay, going into the DSM, oh, you have depression, then you need to take this and this. No, it's about, okay, how do you feel? What is going on with you? It's seeing the, what is your metabolic makeup?
Right.
What is your, like, DNA say about this kind of medication and how it's going to affect you?
Mhm.
And doctors don't do that because, number one, I don't know if they have the training, and number two, they're so backlogged, and number three, it's just not what they were taught. So, I just really think that you hit on a very important thing, is that, when we look at the medications for ourselves or for our loved ones, we really have to look at the big picture. And um, listen to that still small voice, inherent, voice within, that just said, no, I'm not taking more medication. I
Right.
need to do yoga. I need to do this. And, I need to write more, and that, see my therapist. And
Right. Right. Right.
yeah.
And actually observing and being involved with the boys and their psychiatrists, and medications that they have taken. And, during the teen years, there's lots of tweaking and trying to get it all figured out. Um,
Hmm.
I became very aware of, how medications were working, how they were interacting, how they
Yeah.
were making things worse, or, what was making things better.
Right.
And so, yeah, that it just definitely the doctors, they're kind of, I look at it like it's not really scientific. They're just kind of throwing stuff at the
Totally.
wall, trying to
They're like
figure
guinea
it out.
pigs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Because they don't slow down. They just want to fix the problem and
right,
help them get out of, like, quote, pain,
right.
as
But
quickly
they're
as
not living
possible.
it from day to day and
Right.
seeing the ins and outs and how it's affecting them. So it's
Yeah.
really important to pay attention. And I feel really bad for, parents who, single moms, and
Hmm.
um, parents who are working, just trying to
Hmm.
keep food on the table. They
Yeah.
may not have the time to really pay attention to all those details.
Right.
And so that's why a lot of, our society is full of people that have lots of holes because,
Right.
we're just in this capitalistic society, we're just trying to survive. And
Right.
it's not
Oh.
easy for everyone to take the time to look at the whole body and the spirituality and the diet and all of
Mhm.
those things.
Yeah, it's something I'm very passionate about and aware of, and I get very angry, because it's, you know, we're actually, the US is 38 on the, on the healthcare, like, throughout the world, and there's that's saying something. And we are failing one another, and we're all interconnected, and we've created, like, I want to say, like, not we, like, we as a society have created these problems, and we also, as a society, need to fix these issues, so, in terms of, integrative functional medicine, and looking at the whole person, and giving and healthcare as a human right, and everyone
Right.
should have access to the same. um but it is we could go on and talk about that forever, because it's a real problem, and it's rooted in so many different pillars.
Right. Um, I was going to say that actually Kendall is living in California right now, and we're
Hmm.
still in Texas because of the services that are available there that are not
Yes.
available here.
Yes.
And it's a tremendous strain having him there.
Yes.
At the same time, and I'm not involved in his day to day as far as like face to face.
Hmm.
I am still involved from a distance, but it's because of the lack of services.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I hear
Here,
you.
it's just abysmal.
Huh.
What the services that he's getting there, there's a list here that's 15 to 20 years long before you
Mm,
can get the
wow.
same services.
Yeah, that is abysmal.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I can attest to the same thing of like California for services for my son's mental health is really good. Like we've had a lot of access to some wonderful county services throughout the years, um, and also like being on disability, and it's but I also have to commend you the fact that he is living out of state. Like you're able to surrender and allow him to live his life and make his own mistakes. And I think that surrendering to that is one of the biggest lessons for any parent in general, but even more so for parents that have children with special needs
yeah.
and challenges.
It's a process
Yeah.
and it's really hard, but
Yes.
it has to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I have to remind myself day after day after day, because some days I can't, I really want to just be like this, hey, if you did this, this and this, then like, oh my gosh, your world could open up. I have a whole master plan of like what I know would help.
Right.
But having a young adult, my son being 22 now, it's like, whatever, mom, I don't need you, you know. Like I'm
Yeah.
fine, like leave me alone. I know what I'm doing, you know.
Right. Right.
So, and so we have to let them fall and make mistakes because they won't learn. And we're not going to be here forever.
Right.
So,
That's something I'm reminded of very often. I'm not going to be here forever, and you're going to have to figure this out. So
yeah.
you
Yeah.
better start now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've given so much wonderful information, and tell us like where we can, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm so happy to learn about your boys. And I hope to meet them someday. I know I'm going to meet you at the end of October at the writers retreat for a writing room. I feel like I'm working for them. I'm advertising a writing room. It's having a writing retreat the end of October in Los Angeles. And so I'll meet you then. But I do hope to meet, your whole family, Alan and your three boys, and someday. And I hope you get to meet mine. So
Yeah,
I'm really excited.
that would be lovely. Can't wait till October. That'll be fun.
It's going to be great. And so tell the listeners where they can find you and read your work and of all of these stories.
Well, so on Substack, I recently renamed the publication, and it's I Write Hard Things by Karen
Oh,
Wesley. But I
great.
think it's Karen Wesley. You can find me either way. Um, so that's where the Substack is, and then I'm on Instagram as Karen Wesley Writes, and I think the same with Facebook. So
Okay,
those are the places
great.
that you
I
can
write
find
hard
me.
things. I didn't know you updated. I noticed the wonderful blue color,
Yeah,
branding theme that you had going, which I love, but I didn't notice that. So the I Write Hard Things by Karen Wesley, everybody. Um,
yeah, yeah.
so
I just changed it. It's been a month, and
mhm,
I'm digging the new name. So
that's
I
great.
hope I'm going to keep it.
So we've got I Write Hard Things and Spicy Soul Mama. We we are writers together on the platform Substack. So download that app and go get it, and you can read our stuff. So thanks again. I look forward to talking with you again soon, because I feel like we only just scratched the surface.
Right. So much to talk about. But
Yeah.
as the noise is starting outside my window, we better close up.